Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a really warm welcome to you this evening. And for those of us who were on the Caabu online seminar yesterday, excuse me one moment. Apologies, my dog. For those of us who were on the seminar on Lebanon yesterday, we are going to be treated to something of a rather more positive nature today, I think, because we are very pleased to welcome back Diana Darke, who you may remember has been on previous Caabu online seminars regarding her previous books. Warm welcome to you, Diana. So she has produced this absolutely wonderful work on the cultural legacy of the Ottomans, and it's really right up our street at Caabu, because I think it really does challenge the prevailing views and perceptions of the Ottoman Empire, many of them negative, many of them informed by long-term Orientalist beliefs. And I think it will challenge in the nicest possible way many of these preconceptions. So it follows her books on My House in Damascus, which tells a very interesting story from inside the Syria crisis. And of course, last year we had her talking on Stealing from the Saracens, how Islamic architecture shaped Europe. And in many ways, I think this book is a wonderful companion to that. So Diana is a Middle East cultural expert. She is a fluent Arabic speaker, and I can assure you she is. I've heard her speaking it. A very warm welcome to you, Diana. She's going to give us a presentation, which I think is the first time you've spoken about this book of yours. May last about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we shall open it to questions, as ever. It'll be in the chat. Questions only, please. And hopefully we'll have a wonderful evening. A very warm welcome, Diana.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I'm delighted to be hosted by Caabu again. You are always my place of choice to come for a book launch. I think you always do a brilliant job. So thank you very much. I very much appreciate you giving me this chance. And I'd also like to thank Thames and Hudson for producing such a beautiful book. I mean, it is, they've really gone to town on the illustrations inside. Every single page has been designed, as my son said when he picked it up. My God, it's so rare to see a book that's actually designed. With all the illustrations beautifully fitted in around the text where relevant. So they have done a terrific job. And the reason they came to me in the first place is that we're coming up to the centenary of the demise of the Ottoman Empire on the 1st of November. It will be 100 years since they were formally, wiped off the map, I suppose, and all their territories distributed largely among the victorious allies. So it's really, it's a huge topic. I mean, my goodness, when they came to me and they wanted me to write a cultural history, I said, that's going to be massive. I don't think I can take that on, but I will do something about legacy, because I like, when I write a book, I like to make it relevant to today, to point out links that make it meaningful for today. So I've tried to do that throughout the book, really. So there are links, for instance, to what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. I mean, there are links with Russia and, Russia initiating wars that led to the demise of the Ottoman Empire. There are many things that we can actually learn, surprisingly, from the Ottomans, from the way in which they managed their extraordinary empire, which spanned 30 million subjects for a start, 71.5 ethnicities. The half was the Roma, and that's more than the Europeans ever gave them, and 12 different languages. So it's an absolutely massive thing across Europe, Asia, and Africa. So obviously this book is only an introduction, a sort of glimpse, really, of everything that the Ottomans have bequeathed to us as a cultural legacy. But there genuinely is quite a lot we can learn. And the book has been gestating for some time, and people said, "How on earth have you written that so quickly?" But the fact is that it hasn't just popped out like some miracle birth. These are things that I've been thinking about for decades because of my exposure to the Middle East and being lucky enough to live and travel all across the region over many, many years. So a lot of the material in there is the things that I've been thinking about for a long time. That's why I wanted to write the book, in a sense, to say things that not many people know about the Ottomans and not many people say them. So I just wanted these things to reach a larger audience. So I'm going to run through a few pictures just to give a flavor, really, of what I'm covering. So many books about the Ottomans focus on the final bloody decades of the end, basically, which was a complete mess and an absolute chaotic disaster for everybody involved. So we're all too familiar with that in some ways, but what people are less familiar with is the beginnings of the Ottomans, how it all began, how on earth one family managed to come in to Anatolia and gradually form this astonishing empire, still under one family for 600 years. I mean, you have to get something right to be able to do that. And this map shows there in the center, the red of Osman. That is the land that Osman, the leader of the Turkmen tribe, was granted by the Seljuk Sultan as a sort of gift for helping him to fight against the Mongols. And the reason Osman had migrated from Central Asia across the steppes was to escape the Mongols. They were desperately looking for safe areas to pasture their flocks. And so they just kept moving further and further west to get away from the Mongols, and then ended up in this position really quite well placed in a beautiful part of Turkey around Bursa and Iznik, very, very fertile land. So a bit like paradise on earth for them. They, coming from such a bleak, tough landscape in the Central Asian steppes, this was like paradise for them, and they were determined to make it work there. And in this map, all those other colors in Anatolia are all the other Turkish beyliks, as they were called, so under different chieftains, and all of those eventually either went with the Mongols or joined with Osman. And his reputation as a very fierce fighter was well deserved. I mean, the Ottomans were extremely tough, very good fighters. They made their own swords, their own weapons. They were excellent horsemen, and their women fought alongside them. One of the curious things about this that, again, not many people know, is that because the women fought and rode on horseback, properly, not side saddle, they developed trousers that were designed for this, with then gowns worn over the top. And this was the origin of what later became what were called bloomers, when European ladies of the 19th century saw these Turkish baggy trousers. They liked them so much that then this American lady called Amelia Bloomer adopted them. And of course, they then got named after her rather than anything to do with the Ottomans. So the empire or the state that Osman began to set up, one of the things he acknowledged right at the beginning was that they, as nomads, had their limitations. If they were going to set up a successful state, they would need the help of many, many skilled people. Merchants skilled in trade. He always understood the value of trade. And so this incredible commercial spirit developed and was fostered in Bursa to begin with, the first Ottoman capital. They had a network of caravanserais all across Anatolia and then extending into the Balkans. So this was like the glue, if you like, of the state, that everybody could trade. Didn't matter what religion, what nationality, what ethnicity, race you were. It didn't matter at all. The important thing is that you brought skills in And then you became a productive tax-paying citizen that owed your loyalty to the Ottoman state. And in return, the state would protect you and against persecution and allow complete freedom of worship. So these caravanserais were full of Muslims, Christians, Jews, everybody trading with each other and benefiting. So Bursa, the first Ottoman capital, it was the capital for about 40 years or so, is a remarkable place. Not many people have even been there, Westerners at any rate, and it's served as a kind of model. It became the it's designed from the bottom up. That's what's so remarkable about it. It's designed with the community in mind. So you have the mosque, the great mosque in the center there in the picture. You have the bazaars and the khans, all the markets immediately around it. You have the Turkish baths, you have the hospital, the soup kitchen, you have the schools. Everything is designed so that the community has everything it needs, and all these services are provided free of charge to everybody. So everybody can use them. It doesn't matter what religion you are, it doesn't matter at all. Everybody is able to use all of these things. And the way that Bursa was designed has been recognized as a remarkable thing by UNESCO when they turned it into a World Heritage Site. The entry that their entry reads, "The new capital with its social, religious and commercial functions reflects the values of the society and the values it accepted from its neighbors during long years of migration from Central Asia to the West. This is also reflected in the integration of Byzantine, Seljuk, Arab, Persian and other influences in architectural styles." So this is the remarkable thing, that the Ottomans understood how to get on with everybody, how to assimilate and learn from everybody else, and then develop their own identity through that, through working alongside everybody, and everybody was allowed to bring their own special contribution into the pie. So around Bursa, one of the other remarkable things is that Osman, the founder of the empire, set up 7 villages, one for each of his sons and their wives, and the income from these villages was contributed to the running of the community functions in Bursa. So everything was funded by commerce from these villages outside, and some of them are, well, 1 or 2 of them are still in existence, and you can still go there, and it's like entering a sort of medieval town. Quite remarkable, very well worth a visit. And one of the things that Bursa was very famous for, and that was very much encouraged as a trading commodity, was silk. Bursa silk became famous throughout Europe. They not only carpets and garments for the sultans, but liturgical vestments for the clergy, for Christians, were made out of silk. All European nobility and royalty wanted to be dressed in Ottoman silk, so they commissioned special costumes. So it became a very sign of status, if you like, to have these beautiful, luxurious items. And of course, carpets, the Ottoman carpets, from their nomadic heritage, the striking designs of the carpets are very, very distinctive. All the tribal elements are there. And one of the chapters actually that I most enjoyed writing in this book is called The Ottoman Aesthetic, because I try to get into behind, if you like, what lies behind this unique Ottoman aesthetic where flowers and gardens are so integral to everything that they design. And tiles obviously are tremendously important in that as well. So then after 40 years at Bursa, the Ottomans grew to the point where they were able to set up their second capital in Edirne on the European mainland, Adrianople, in what is today's Greece. And this map shows how they gradually then expanded into the Balkans and further north, up around the Black Sea there, into areas like Ukraine at the moment, and down into Syria and Egypt and across North Africa and all the way down to Mecca and Medina. So in Edirne, you start to see a different, again, a unique kind of Ottoman architecture. So this is where the Sultan lived in Edirne. Extraordinary building, unlike anything I've ever seen before. This looks a bit like a spaceship, but it's actually, it's the name for it in Turkish is a sort of panoramic heaven, and it's a bit like a tent right up high, circular tent, because all Ottoman tents were circular, with tremendous views, because the Ottomans loved to be up high and have views down over everything. And in Edirne, it became very clear again that they were fostering all religions. So this is the synagogue in Edirne today. It's still there, still functioning. And the artworks, commemorate all these relationships between the different religious groupings, where this, on the left there, you've got Mehmet the Conqueror giving religious freedom in decrees to the patriarch, to the Orthodox patriarch. Everybody was allowed to continue to worship freely in their own synagogues or churches. And then Mehmet the Conqueror himself, in this very famous painting of him sniffing a flower. I think it's one of my favorite images of the Ottomans. It sort of sums them up. But Mehmet was an incredibly sophisticated, well-educated man. He was trilingual. He had a sort of avid curiosity about everything, wanted to understand how the world worked, how the state of affairs everywhere. So his knowledge was vast, and his curiosity was insatiable. And on top of that, he was a very keen gardener himself, and so he would actually work as a gardener in the gardens of the Topkapi Palace himself, just for relaxation. And this slide is I just think it's such an amazing slide, just to slightly give a bit of background as to why Constantinople was so weakened. This was an image of the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when the Latin Catholics of Rome on crusade were meant to be going to Jerusalem, diverted to Constantinople and attacked the Orthodox Christians there, and then looted everything and took it back to Venice and to cities all over Italy. And this image shows that very well, running off with all the loot and booty. I mean, St. Mark's in Venice is covered in booty from Constantinople. So the city was very weakened by that. And I think it's just worth reflecting a little on the location of Constantinople, today's Istanbul, of course, straddling the Bosphorus there. And of course, the way we think of that is the European side on the left and the Asian side on the right. But it's worth stressing that the Ottomans didn't think like that. They didn't think about East and West in the way that we do at all. These concepts were completely irrelevant to them. So they bridged everything. And so whereas we in Europe have tended to think of the Ottomans, and indeed to some extent modern Turkey, as a sort of bridge between Europe and Asia, or a sponge to stop the sort of chaos of whatever's going on in the Middle East reaching Europe. It's important to say that the Ottomans, and for that matter the modern Turks, never thought of themselves as a bridge or indeed a sponge. So the unique style that the Ottomans brought to Istanbul, you can see very clearly in their palace, the Topkapi Palace, which is unlike anything else that had ever been seen before. I mean, as a palace, again, it completely mystified most European ambassadors because it's sort of modest scale, if you like. Nothing is more than 2 stories. It's all very low rise and discreet. The design of it in the courtyards is actually thought to be modeled on a sort of Ottoman nomadic encampment where you enter through one courtyard into the other, and then the sultan, the leader of the tribe, is in the furthermost place from the entrance. So he's in the most protected place. And this is an aerial photo of one of the Turkish miniatures of the Topkapi Palace. It gives a sort of aerial view. This is very typical of Ottoman design, where they give a bird's eye view of something from the sky. So all their cities are designed, the maps and everything is designed like a bird's eye view. And you can see there how it's surrounded by gardens everywhere, completely full of gardens, and the courtyards themselves are also full of flowers. Of course, tulips are one of the famous flowers that came into Europe from the Ottomans. So this painting, 19th century painting, shows a Dutch nobleman guarding one solitary tulip in its pot, a rare pot there, while all the other soldiers run around trying to destroy the other ones to stabilize the market, because it all became completely crazy, out of hand. The price of tulip bulbs, you could buy an entire property in France for one tulip bulb. And then the whole market finally did crash, and it's thought of in history as the very first bursting of an asset bubble. So the Topkapi kitchens are another remarkable thing when you go around the palace these days. I mean, there were 60 different chefs being employed there. The importance of Ottoman cuisine was massive. They scoured the empire for the top chefs and had very, very tough interviews for people, and only the best were recruited. And the recipes were kept secret. And Ottoman cuisine, of course, is the basis for everything we think of these days as Lebanese, as Greek. All of these things like hummus and everything, was essentially Ottoman before it became adopted by all the Ottoman provinces and became then part of their own culture. Just like coffee, of course. So in Istanbul, the first coffee houses were in the 1550s, and coffee was alternately banned and then permitted again by various sultans, because they couldn't quite make up their minds whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. And it then took a while to find its way to Europe, and really only took off in a big way after the Second Siege of Vienna in the 1680s, when among the things that were abandoned when the Ottomans suddenly had to flee was a bag of coffee beans, and nobody knew what on earth they were and what to do with them. And except for one person who'd been an Ottoman prisoner for a couple of years, and he realized what they were and ground them into coffee. And so it was in Vienna that the taste for coffee first developed, and then gradually spread to this country too, of course, with coffee houses. So coffee houses were you've got cafes that were called the Sultaness's Head, sort of rival to the King's Head as a pub, and they were known as penny universities, where you could go and listen to erudite conversations for the cost of a penny for your cup of coffee. So also at the Siege of Vienna, the Ottomans left behind a lot of their instruments, and so a lot of the stringed instruments that became familiar then across Europe were first discovered that way. Sort of, they were acquired as booty, and along with huge quantities of food. Again, people marveled at how well the Ottomans were equipped. I mean, food, they sent their bakers ahead so that when the army arrived at a particular place, the food tent was already set up and hearty meals were served throughout. I mean, the level of logistic planning that they were capable of was very much part of their secret of success in their expansion. Their management of water too is another phenomenal achievement. I mean, Sinan, the court architect who served under 3 different sultans in the 16th century. I mean, he was the water engineer to begin with for the Ottoman court, and he brought huge quantities of water into the center of Istanbul so that fountains with free public water, running water, could be everywhere, and so that the hygienic arrangements in Istanbul were way ahead of any European city. I mean, they had well over 1,000 public toilets in the 1500s already. I mean, at a time when in Europe it was thought unhealthy to even bathe at all. And the Süleymaniye Mosque, which is one of Sinan's masterpieces. The reason I'm showing you this is because in the design of the dome, Sinan was a natural environmentalist. And again, this is something the Ottomans, it struck me again and again how, because they were originally nomads, they were used to living close to nature, in harmony with nature. And so recycling and environmentalism was something that was very deeply embedded in their psyche. So Sinan, when he designed the dome of the Süleymaniye, he made the air circulation so that all the soot from the candles and the oil lamps was funneled up into the dome and into a special filter room, so that the clean air could then be released into the city. And the soot that was collected was then fed into a fountain and made into special high quality ink for calligraphy. And that ink, because it was from soot, had natural insect repellent qualities. I mean, that was just phenomenal for the mid-1550s as a sort of recycling perfection, really. Just remarkable. And so calligraphy obviously is one of the great skills of the Ottomans in their artwork. And all the sultans wrote poetry themselves from 1400 onwards. Even Selim the Grim, as we know him, Selim the Resolute, as his Turkish name Yavuz should be translated. They all wrote poetry, and there are quite a few examples of the poetry that they wrote in the book. So their love of animals too is something that's very striking. Again, as nomads, I think they had to look after their animals and live alongside them, not exploit them, but look after them. So one of the Ottoman remarkable things that you see in Istanbul and in other cities, Ottoman cities, are these incredible birdhouses that are just designed like palaces to look after birds. And the Ottomans were the first to set up an animal hospital. They had a thing called the Helpless Stork Foundation, where broken wings were mended. Quite advanced, really, at a time when animals were certainly right at the bottom of the agenda in Europe. And to this day, by the way, there's a law in Istanbul protecting stray animals. Stray animals must be looked after and must not be treated cruelly. And there was even a film in 2021 called Stray that commemorates that very sort of special bond between the people of Istanbul and the stray dogs that live on the streets. So this picture here is of a Sufi tekke in Bosnia, the Blagaj tekke it's called. And I'm showing it to you to make the point that right from the very start, from Osman onwards, all sultans had a religious dervish figure alongside them. They were very close to the Sufi movements, and these religious spiritual guides almost fought alongside them as well, and were tremendously important in the setting up of the empire and in giving spiritual guidance to the early sultans. all across the Balkans, there are relics of this, because the Sufi tekkes were disbanded, obviously, by Ataturk after the First World War. But across the Balkans, you can still find remnants of these. And so there's a remarkable mosque and Sufi Bektashi tekke in Tetova in North Macedonia, for example. And then, of course, were bridges, the incredible technology of bridges that the Ottomans built. This one in Mostar in Bosnia, which again was blown up, of course, in the Balkan Wars in 1993, because it was a symbol of harmony, of coexistence between the Christians and the Muslims on the different sides of the riverbank. So it was blown up, but then rebuilt, of course, in 2004. And the bridge, the famous bridge over the River Drina, the book by Ivo Andrić, which 1945 was probably responsible for him winning the Nobel Literature Prize. Again, built by Sinan. Remarkable bridge that again has a rather bloody history in the Balkan Wars, with bodies being thrown off the bridge and clogging up the hydroelectric dam, and the manager complaining about it. And then the DNA that was investigated later during a renovation showed that the victims ranged in age between 94 and 3, so a pretty grisly time then. But health and vaccination originated in Turkey. I mean, the smallpox vaccination, this stamp that they produced, commemorates that more than 300 years. So it began in 1717, and you can see from the stamp there that it tended to be women giving the vaccine to children inside a Turkish bath. They would give a bit of live vaccine, and so this technique became quite widespread, and the sultans adopted it and made it compulsory for everybody to be vaccinated. People couldn't get a job or attend university unless they were vaccinated. And the technique then found its way to Europe and to England via the British ambassador's wife, Lady Montagu. She allowed it to happen to her son. She herself had been disfigured by smallpox and wanted to protect her son. And so, gradually it was brought back into this country, into a very skeptical reception at the beginning, and people didn't want to try it, and they eventually tried it out on condemned prisoners. And then when they were sufficiently sure that it was safe, of course, the royal family and the elites were given it first. So the complete opposite of the Ottoman approach, where it was literally given to everybody, including refugees and migrants. So public hygiene and health, tremendously important. The Ottomans revived the tradition of public bathing. All across the Balkans to this day, there are quite a few functioning Ottoman baths. And plagues, they had their fair share, including the Black Death, across their 600 years. And they learnt to manage it, really quite successfully, with mask wearing, very early mask wearing, and special centres to Hafızhane, they called it, which are basically quarantine centres, where this one happens to be in the West Bank in Hebron. But all along the Dardanelles, for example, they had quarantine stations where ships coming into Istanbul had to self-isolate before they were allowed in, to be sure that they were clear of any kind of plague. And now this is still in the Balkans, so we have incredibly well-preserved Ottoman towns still. So this is Berat and Gjirokasta in Albania. Again, they're UNESCO World Heritage Sites today, because they do represent perfect examples of the kind of lifestyle that used to exist then. And the interiors, you can see the Ottomans, as they were, the divans around the edges of the rooms, and the style of these multifunctional rooms, a bit like a tent in a way. The principle is carried on. So You can turn it into a bedroom. You just pack away all the bedding into the cupboards, and it's sort of multifunctional room in a very flexible way that reveals the sort of nomadic way of thinking and maximizing the space that you have. And they like to build on hillsides always, so that for more privacy and for better drainage when it rained, and for better air circulation generally. So just coming to an end now, just to, again, obviously my house in Damascus is an Ottoman courtyard house, all the same styles. My secret ceiling, as I called it, is an Ottoman ceiling with the usual sort of flowers and gardens as part of the the integral part of the designs. And so I just want to finish by reading you just a very quick section, because at the end, because I was left at the end thinking, my goodness, what an extraordinary history they've had. And Thames and Hudson allowed me to do a big road trip down to through the Balkans, and I said, look, I don't want to write the conclusion of this book till I've done this road trip down to the Balkans, and they agreed. So, and the reflection that I wrote then at the end of that, I'm just going to quickly read that out to you. So, did people live happily ever after? I found myself wondering, once they were freed from the Ottoman yoke. Across the 3 continents the Ottoman Empire once straddled, I struggled to think of a place where this might be the case. The Arab provinces were carved into unnatural entities for the Allies' convenience after the First World War, and have suffered ever since. The Ottoman provinces of historic Syria, which at one time stretched right down to the Sinai Peninsula, are today the powder keg mix of Israel, the occupied Palestinian territory, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. Ottoman tributary states in Eastern Europe, like Podalia, part of modern Ukraine, Moldavia, Wallachia, Transylvania, and the Crimean Khanate, fell victim to complex wars initiated by the Russian imperial agenda, eerily echoing the current Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Balkan countries, once liberated, proceeded to turn on themselves in the name of nationalism, becoming a panoply of small, unviable, mutually antagonistic, and internally intolerant states. It was a disaster that resulted in some of the worst massacres in European history, giving us the very word balkanization. Bosnians today fear the pro-Russian actors will use the Ukraine crisis to stir up big trouble in the Balkans. The long road trip from England to Albania I completed in October 2021 involved crossing 20 national borders. Each set of officials and each set of entry rules for the COVID-19 pandemic served to reinforce the message that borders accentuate differences, a fact that frequently leads to divisive disputes. Juggling between separate currencies and languages, sometimes 3 in one day, left me with a sense of the political fragility across the region, where communities are moving ever further apart, no longer even learning each other's languages. So there are some serious stuff, obviously, in the book, but there are also many light-hearted and entertaining things. So it is a complete mix, really. And so when you eat your yogurt, when you reach for your towel, when you relax on your sofa, just remember the Ottoman cultural legacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana, for that very stimulating talk. And just to remind you, Joe has put in the chat the link to the book. Having gone through much of it myself, I can heartily recommend it. It is really brilliant. I just wondered if I could kick off with a question, because a couple of things really struck me in reading the book about the meritocratic nature of the Ottoman Empire. But also, I suppose this resonates with all our debates that we have today in Europe, including Britain, about their policy and attitude to refugees. I wonder if you might wish to expand on that.
Absolutely. Well, those are the two incredible things that you know, in my conclusion, I do go on to say that really the Ottoman attitude to refugees is something we could most definitely learn from. I mean, they welcomed everybody, and for instance, in the Reconquista in Spain, when Ferdinand and Isabella kicked out Jews in particular, and then Muslims as well, slightly later. The Ottomans welcomed them with open arms and said, you know, come to us, we will welcome you. Their attitude always, I mean, they had to take in hundreds of thousands of refugees. And the refugees they had to take in from Russia, for example, were from the Caucasus, led them to set up an Ottoman refugee code in the 1860s. So incredibly well enlightened, frankly, because their view was that everybody should be welcomed, and refugees, if you looked after them and helped them to get back on their feet, would become grateful tax-paying citizens. So it was a completely different way of looking at things. You know, everybody was welcomed, and under the refugee code, they were given money, they were given land to get themselves started again. It was extraordinary. And on the meritocratic point that you mentioned, again, this one of the things about their attitude, that anybody from who showed themselves able was you know, could rise to the very top. And what it meant was that by and large, the people running the empire were competent people. I think that's another reason why they were so successful for so long. I mean, it was the most cosmopolitan state on earth, in a way that we could learn from. That you know, multiculturalism is something that only benefits, actually. And I mean, the Ottomans certainly had that attitude, that everybody from different cultures brought in their own particular skills, and as a result, everybody benefited. That was the basis of their philosophy.
Absolutely. So they wouldn't have had a Home Secretary wanting to deport people to Rwanda.
Absolutely not, no.
We have a question from Stephen Booth. Stephen, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Chris.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to ask Diana whether your book also covers the last 50 years or so of the Ottoman Empire, when they did make big efforts to modernize and adopt then modern technology. I also wondered whether perhaps they made some mistakes politically by aligning themselves with the Russian Empire for a while. Would you like to comment on those 2 points?
Yes, I mean, it's absolutely not the focus of this book, actually. Those final years, the Tanzimat. I mean, obviously they are mentioned, and you know, there are quite a few references to the Tanzimat, and there's no doubt that mistakes were made. I mean, clearly they ended up on the wrong side of things. Yes, I mean they, but you know, it's a very tricky one. Obviously, it's an immensely complex subject, and but the thing that I've tended to feel is that by and large, you know, you can't begin to say that the Ottomans were angels. You know, clearly many brutal acts happened, but then, you know, many other people were also being equally brutal. But one thing the Ottomans never did was to any kind of ethnic genocide. You know, they didn't wipe out a group of people because they were, you know, a particular type of Christian or a particular type of Muslim or anything like that, or Jewish. That when they became violent, it was because they had been betrayed, if you like, by people they thought they were looking after as their citizens. So, you know, they punished disloyalty, as they saw it, very, very viciously. But it was rather different to the sort of motivation, if you like, for their violence was different, and they certainly weren't into ethnic cleansing in the way that Europeans quite often were.
We have a question from Rima Mehi. Rima?
Yeah, hello, Doctor. Thank you very much. This has been a very interesting, fascinating, the pictures. I really enjoyed them. I'm working on Greater Syria, the massacres, the era of the massacres between the Christians and the Druze between 1840 and 1860 in Greater Syria under Ottoman rule. And unfortunately, the picture you presented is very far from the archives that I am reading that really present the Ottomans in a very divisive way and intolerant and cruel in many of their policies. So I would really appreciate some feedback on how you perceive the role of the Ottoman Empire during that period in Mount Lebanon, first, and second, if you would be kind enough to guide me to be able to get some pictures for that era, if you have any sources that you recommend. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, I mean, yes, obviously there were some extremely corrupt Ottoman governors, very, very, there was a lot of maladministration. There's no getting away from it. Once the Ottoman Empire started to decline, the 19th century was pretty disastrous, and some terrible things happened. I can't, well, I mean, it's a very complex picture, and I have not studied it to the length that obviously other scholars have done detailed work on this, and I know that Eugene Rogan, for example, is working on this very period at the moment, and will be producing a book on it. And so, I mean, I think it's wonderful to do lots of research that shows every side of the picture. I mean, what I'm doing here for the centenary, if you like, is trying to show, a range of options, but a range of ways of looking at the Ottomans, and you will always be able to point at things that they did wrong, and I'm not trying to exonerate those things at all, but I think you will benefit hugely from the work that Eugene Rogan produces in your own researches too.
He was initially my mentor when I was at Oxford for a semester, so thank you for pointing him out. Yes, Eugene is wonderful. He's an expert on the era. And with respect to pictures, do you know do you recommend any sources in Turkey or anywhere in particular, any databases for pictures? Because I loved the pictures that you presented.
For that period, you mean for that period in the 1860 massacres and all of that? I'm afraid I don't have any particular websites in mind. No, I don't have any special places I would look. No, just the usual range of places.
Thank you so much. I'll leave the floor for other people who have questions. Thank you again. Thank you, Doctor.
Good luck with your research.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, we got a question from Roger Higginson.
Chris, thanks. Sorry, I just speak because I on my screen all I can see is names of people. Diana, you'll be aware that during the current war of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there's been quite a lot of discussion about the way President Erdogan appears to try to hedge his bets between conciliating Russia on the one hand, but keeping another foot in the Western camp at the same time, obviously from his perspective for the benefit of Turkey as a whole. I'm curious, do you have a view, is this something unique to Erdogan and the specific circumstances of this year, or is this balancing act something that can be tracked back through the history of the Ottomans between the various powers that either could have been perceived to be a threat or possibly a benefit? Thank you.
Goodness, what a question. Well, I happen to think, I know Erdogan is very unpopular, and it's true he's done many, ill-advised things, especially since the coup, when obviously he went a bit paranoid and clamped down on the media far too much. But I do think he's a very, very skilled politician, and he does understand the region in a way that very few other people do. So he does tread this sort of tightrope act between trying to, balance between what is in the best interests of Turkey, and to try to manage things for Turkey's advantage. It's the same as what any other leader tries to do for their own country, really. And I think, well, as to whether the Ottomans themselves I think some sultans were better at it than others. But I think the nature of their geographical position just there, sitting where they do with that, in Istanbul there, does mean that they will always get battered by a great deal of instability. So I think it has to become part of whoever's in charge's job to try to negotiate it all, and it's pretty tricky. And I wouldn't envy anybody who has to do that. And I think, I think Erdogan probably has one of the most difficult jobs on the planet at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Reem Tukmani has a question.
Yes, hi. Diana, thank you. That was very, very interesting. I very much enjoyed it. I learned lots of new things. Thank you. That was very enlightening. I have a comment and a question. It's a bit of a follow-up to Rima's Merhi's questions. It's really about the way the Ottoman culture and practices manifested themselves in the area that is Turkish versus other areas further away, like in the Levant, where we have a very bitter memory of the Ottoman presence. Let's say it's different to that the Turks would have of the Ottoman period. Maybe it's a bit like how the English culture or British culture was manifested in Britain versus how it was perceived further away in India, even though it brought lots of good elements with it as well. So the fact that the rulers have always come from Turkey, imposing the cities in Syria and Lebanon and Palestine, it was never well received in the area. And we have a memory of very bloody episodes, not only during the collapse period. However, I want just to also ask a question about the quotation that you read towards the end. It somehow implies that if the Ottomans have stayed, if the Ottoman Empire did not collapse, things would have been better in all these areas. Now, let me talk about the Levant at least. Okay, yes, things didn't get much better after the Ottomans left, but actually there was a small window between the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the arrival of the mandating power of France, where you find the people in the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, and Palestine, feeling so excited that, okay, finally, and you see that. I mean, I studied the archive of the press during that period, and you see people writing articles about how excited they are now that finally they have the chance to build their own state, do it the way they want. Finally, the Ottomans are gone. Let's come together as Christians and Jews and Muslims and design our state. There was a feeling of joy all over, and of course we know how the story ended. So, is that quotation really? Did I understand it correctly? That maybe we would have been better if the Ottomans have stayed at least in the Levant, because I don't think this is what the Levantine people would have wanted.
No. I mean, obviously, my quotation is aimed largely at the Balkans, really. And what you say is absolutely right. Are you talking about the little window, literally, of very sort of a couple of years between the end of the war and then France coming in? You mean? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it was I mean, you know, the thing about that period, from what I remember, is, I mean, Syria was completely devastated by the war. I mean, so everywhere was in utter poverty, wasn't it? And so Faisal trying to rule the place, I mean, it was ungovernable basically by that point. I mean, it was a tragic situation. And again, I mean, all this stuff is so complex. I mean, I can't really answer your question in a couple of sentences. It really is. I mean, one thing I do remember some Syrian friends telling me was that after the war, they were keen to have the Americans come in, you know, and then there was that King Crane Commission where Americans went round the country asking people what, you know, how they wanted things to be, but unfortunately it was ignored, and you know, and Britain and France ended up carving everything up to their own you know, interests, obviously. So yes, I mean, you can't look at a period of this long, you know, 600 years. You know, it's going to be a very, very complex picture. And what I've tried to do in the book, and it's obviously incredibly difficult, is to try to bring a kind of overview, if you like, that gives a flavor, at least, of some of the things that they did better.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not for 1 minute saying that they did everything beautifully and that they were perfect and angels. Of course they weren't. You know, no empire, no successful empire has ever been like that. But there were some things that they did do surprisingly well, and you know, certainly the whole refugee question and the meritocratic openness and the you know, were you know, quite commendable and quite ahead of their time, really.
Ali Bahajoub has got his hand up. I'm going to take that as the last question. If you could keep it brief, though, Ali.
Thank you. Given the fact that the Ottomans had a very rich history and culture, why is it that Kemal Atatürk embarked on westernizing Turkey?
Yeah, well, there you're into another whole thing again, isn't it? I mean, my goodness. Well, this is, I mean, really, the irony of all of that is extraordinary. That you know, the Ottomans never thought of themselves as Turks. This is the other thing that I found quite interesting. That they, you know, to be a Turk at that point, you know, in Ottoman times, was to be a sort of country bumpkin. You know, they never considered themselves Turks as such. The first time it became a sort of badge of honor to become a Turk, you know, was under Ataturk, where he covered the hillsides in that slogan, you know, Ne mutlu Türk'üm diyene, how happy is he who can say he is a Turk? And then, of course, everybody had to be a Turk. So all Kurds had to be mountain Turks, you know. I mean, it was a different kind of disaster. and you know, some of the chaos, my goodness, you know, the exchange of populations between the Greeks and the Turks then in 1924, I think it was just an extraordinary act of, you know, just unthinkable really, what happened, what was done to people in the name of progress at that time. I mean, I mean, this is the thing about this whole part of the world. I mean, Turkey is so much to learn, so much, you know, so rich that you could never really get on top of all of it. It's one of the reasons I do find it so very, very interesting. But yeah, I mean, there's never a dull moment in Turkey. That's certainly true.
Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but I'm sure we could certainly go on for a lot longer and explore many other different themes. Just a reminder, we had a lot of rich talk about the politics of it all, but actually this is a book about their cultural legacy, and there's a huge amount about that, the slightly softer side of life. It is really worthwhile getting your hands on a copy, please do. So my thanks, first of all, to everybody for coming tonight and listening and for your questions, but above all to Diana Darke for having produced a wonderful work and for enlightening us this evening with her thoughts and wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for hosting as ever. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.